Welcome everyone to the first Insight Group webinar of 2017. Over the next 50 minutes, we'll be discussing how you can grab your customers' attention using effective content marketing at scale. My name is Aaron Jackson. I'm the project director here at the Insight Group, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. And now, before we get started with today's discussion, I just want to remind you all that we're recording today's webinar and that everyone will receive the audio recordings early next week. The webinar is very much interactive, and I really urge you to type your own questions into the chat box. There are over 1,200 of you registered for this webinar, and we want to tailor the insights to your challenges. You can do this at any point, and we'll be sure to incorporate these into the discussion throughout the webinar. We're also using the hashtag InsightSummit, which you can see on the right of the slide. So again, any questions or additional thoughts, please do tweet away. I'm delighted to be joined by two great speakers today, providing perspectives from two very different industries. Firstly, joining us is Amy Johnson. She's the Vice President of Content Marketing and SEO at BBVA Compass, who are one of the largest banks in America. Also joining us is John Canning. He's the Vice President of Interactive Services at NBCUniversal, and he's also the Vice President of New Media and Chairman of the New Media Council at the Producers Guild of America. Welcome to you both. It's great to have you involved. So to kickstart the discussion today, we'll begin our first poll. You can only select one answer, and I'll give you around 15 seconds to do so. How would you describe your company's investment plans when it comes to content marketing in 2017? Firstly, are you reducing the investment in content marketing? Are you keeping the same investment in content marketing, increasing the investment you have in content marketing, or significantly increasing the investment in content marketing? So please do vote now. See, they're all coming through. And I'm going to close the poll shortly. So I'm going to close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So that poll is just closing now, and you should see the results coming up on your screen shortly. I guess perhaps unsurprisingly, a very, very small percentage of you are reducing your investment in content marketing, and the vast majority increasing your investment, which is great. There's also quite a big chunk if you're keeping the same investment. So actually, I think, Amy, if I come to you first, is this surprising to you? Is this what you expected to see?
I think this is what I expected to see. I think most of us are finding ways that content marketing is really building our business and telling the story of our brand, and I've heard from a lot of my colleagues that they're also increasing their spend this year.
Oh, that's good to hear, right? It's because we're doing the webinar on it. John, I guess come to you. Are you surprised at all by this, or is this what you're seeing as well?
No, it's fully what I would expect. Although, I would think, as people think more aggressively about how content can be leveraged, and obviously consider the definition, what do you think of content and things like that, there's going to be seen more effort in there, but it's, whether they're increasing it or maintaining it, it's definitely right in line.
Okay. And I guess to add a bit more context around to today's discussion, John, I'd be interested to find out, what does effective content marketing mean to you? It's just a real kind of brief explanation to set the conversation going.
Sure. I had this conversation that if you do content well, and I'm in a business that when you have, say, a linear television property and you're doing content around it, some people are like, oh, you're just doing that for marketing of the show. I argue that if you do it effectively, it adds to the multi-platform storytelling, and yes, does promote the show, but does it in such a way that isn't beat people over the head, and that effectively promoting your property and getting people interested in something that potentially is the main or the longer form is the whole key to it. But it should be compelling and interesting in itself, and not just an ad. So I think of when I think of content, I think of telling stories, mini stories, side stories that add to the main IP.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. I mean, you've got such strong fan bases there, and you need to engage those rather than, I guess, kind of sell and advertise to them. Amy, I'm guessing it's going to be quite a different view for yourself at BBVA. What does effective content marketing look like at BBVA Compass?
Yeah, it's quite different for us. So we have consumer, small business, commercial, and wealth clients. So we serve a really broad range of clients, and they have different needs. And so we measure success and how effective we're being in content marketing based on the individual audience. So we have different definitions of that success by audience. So the way a consumer engages with content would be different than the way a CFO at really large enterprise would engage with the content. So we measure it by audience and by intent. And so telling the brand story is the same as John, really important with us. And reaching the audience is really important. The way we measure it varies based on the audience, and the type of content we're creating varies significantly based on audience.
Okay. I understand that. I'm interested to hear some of the metrics you have later on in the webinar as well, and for how the metrics change, I guess, for different audiences and different people. So I'm interested to start, I guess, talking about content production and planning. What are the first steps you take when planning out your content production strategy? I'll come to you first, Amy.
Sure, absolutely. So everything with us, as I mentioned, ties back to audience. We tightly define the audience and plan every piece of our content based on their needs. We've spent quite a bit of effort defining those audiences with our internal data as well as industry data. We've done quite a bit of talking to clients one-on-one about what their content needs are, what their needs are with their money and with their lives. Banking is a really interesting industry because everybody needs a bank. Money dictates so many things about our lives, and no matter what you want to do, whether it's sending your kid to college or moving across the country for a career opportunity or going on vacation, all of it ties back to money and the way you engage with your money, and so it's a really personal thing, and we always really want to respect that when we're planning. And so understanding the individual audience needs, understanding their life stage, understanding exactly what their intent is when they're engaging with our content, and helping them reach their goals. A lot of our content's really proactive, and we want to start a conversation to help spur people on to meeting their financial goals and reaching out for those opportunities in life that sometimes slip by because we're so engaged with the day-to-day minutia that we don't step back and look at the big picture. So it all starts with audience.
Sure, sure. I know from some of our previous conversations that the content that they have at BBVA is quite engaging, often on an emotional level. So well, now it makes a lot of sense that you start with the audience. John, when you, I guess, start mapping out new content and think about your plans, do you also start looking at the audience, or what's your approach like?
Well, certainly, and I think at the Producers Guild, I represent the new media side, which is, it's I would say the not film and television. And those are independent producers who really, I would say, over the last couple of years have risen in the hyper-focused on audiences. And what I mean by that is if you look at a YouTube, somebody has created a series on YouTube or any other digital distribution platform who's hyper-focused on a particular audience, who is starting to live and die by how that audience reacts. There was a recent kerfuffle about one YouTuber who was taking money from a game company and promoting a game but not being straightforward, and they saw their audience plummet because of that lack of authenticity and lack of honesty. They're much more connected to their audiences than I would say large media companies, just by the sheer fact of smaller individuals, smaller producers that are sort of on that front line distributing directly to a consumer, to an audience. And they have to keep that in mind because in some cases their audience is fickle, in some cases it can polarize them. So it seems very immediate and adaptable sort of environment up to large media companies where you constantly have to test the notion of what you're putting out. People's sensitivities change. They may want something different, and just because a formula worked once doesn't mean it's going to necessarily work again.
Sure. No. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And when you're planning kind of a new piece of content, how do you decide what's the right format for it? How do you decide, for this specific goal, I want to use this format or I want to use this channel? What sort of steps do you have in process for that, John?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on the type of producer. Frankly, from you're looking at the demographics of what they reach. There's a lot of folks that are experimenting now, even in the big corporate environment, with Snapchat because they like the audience that is around a Snapchat, that uses Snapchat, that they think they can reach with Snapchat, versus potentially a Facebook environment or a YouTube environment or a Vimeo environment ad infinitum. So they're looking at where their audiences are or paying attention, or they can incite them and trying to use that as a distribution method. But then, it depends on the kinds of content you're producing and what some of those mediums are more applicable to it. I know folks that are doing interesting content series on Amazon, and they're heavily leveraging the merchandising aspect of it, and creating content that appeals to a particular audience and then selling products that also appeal to that particular audience. So it's very, the content is one could argue is driving the sale, and they don't have to necessarily push the products or do integrated branded content. What they're doing is they're doing content that appeals and products that appeal to that audience right next to it.
Okay, so it comes back to audience again and starting looking at your audience and what's the best way to connect with them. Amy, I'm interested. I'm not sure if you use Snapchat it to promote the bank, but when you're looking at a new piece of content for part of a campaign, how do you decide which format it's going to take?
Yeah, we actually do use Snapchat. We've had
okay.
a lot of success with Snapchat and filters for local events. So our social team has done a really great job in creating custom filters for hyperlocal events that get a lot of engagement, a lot of use. So I'm really excited to see what they continue to do in 2017, but 2016 it's been a really surprising amount of engagement. I think they've done a really great job with some beautiful creative. So, I'll just add to the audience theme that we seem to be adopting here. I'll say we do a lot of testing to see what sorts of content our audiences engage with. And so when we're planning for a content strategy and deciding which format is most appropriate, all of it comes down to testing. And sometimes we test in a small subset of the audience and then go bigger. And sometimes for long-term content, we start with what we believe to be the best approach based on past experience, and then we modify it as we go along. Most of the content we create is living, breathing, changing over time. So that's our approach.
Okay. That's interesting to hear. And not just on the Snapchat, we actually had a question come through while you were talking about that from Laia Daniels. How do you measure? I know we're going to come a lot more to measure and metrics later on in the webinar, but I'm interested to hear how do you measure success on Snapchat? Maybe John, do you want to take that one first?
Right now Snapchat it's directly related to the views, and marketing teams love that number. They can grab onto that number and say, we know how many people viewed this, and so you're doing it from an exposure standpoint. That is a form of engagement. Does it actually translate into, if it's a Snapchat series related to an existing IP that you're trying to go get people to pay attention to, does that translate? Hard to say. If you're natively using that content and not trying to drive to somewhere else, but that's using it as one of your entertainment outlets, then you can directly attribute that to your success, depending on your, also your branded and financial relationship there. But the number of views does, gives that intent, gives that sense of success.
Sure. And Amy, is that the same when you're looking at your own Snapchat campaigns? Is it just the number of views at the moment, or is there a bit more of a model going on for tracking down the line?
It's views and story completions. Excuse me. I think it's pretty basic at this point. We would love to get more mature with it over time. As a financial brand, the way we use Snapchat, I'm sure, varies a lot from the way John is using it. But really, it's all about telling stories and connecting with consumers. So the number of views and the number of visitors who complete stories is basically the way that we measure success.
Sure. That makes sense. I'm sure down the line as Snapchat evolves, it will get closer to some of the other networks, but being able to give you all sorts of demographics and metrics to follow. I've had another question from Andrew. So Andrew's a video producer, and he's been experimenting with infographic videos. And he said that he started to get a lot of engagement when he first released the infographics, but is now not seeing as much engagement on his things using channels such as Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And I don't know if either of you have kind of experimented with kind of infographics before, or video infographics, or have any advice for Andrew.
We really love using infographics to tell stories and to communicate messages. And one of the things I found with infographics to keep them fresh and alive and in front of more viewers is to create other assets that depend on them, to give them somewhere to go from the infographic. And so let the infographic be part of an ecosystem with ebooks and podcasts and articles and ways to engage with social media. Give people somewhere to go and action to take. And I find that drives a lot more engagement and gets a lot more interest.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's with sort of great responsibility, great capabilities comes great responsibility. I've seen, infographics gone bad. I think break it down. You have to break it down back to storytelling, and the infographic shouldn't be gratuitous. They need to be telling a part of the story, and you have to realize that it gets used a lot. So then you almost have to pull back and be sparing in how you use it to be careful that people aren't like just being barraged by information. So it's your audience may have enjoyed the novelty of it. I don't know what kind of videos this person's producing, but it may be at some point they're like, okay, got it. Or it was novel to begin with and they don't need it anymore. So I find it's where you're answering a question or you need to enforce a point that you can do sometimes subtly. Again, it's part of the craft of if you're trying to bake messages or things into media, some of your audience can detect they're hitting me over the head again moment and be turned off about that. So crafting a story is just because you have tools to do it doesn't mean that you should always throw them in there.
Totally agree. I think that telling an infographic story should be a story that you almost couldn't tell any other way. Infographics are such a powerful tool if you're trying to convey a lot of data or let people interact with the data in a creative way, but don't just use them gratuitously because it gets old.
Infographics are your statement was spot on, Amy. I say the same thing about using virtual reality these days or 360. If it aids to telling your story, or you think it's the only way you can tell the story, you use those techniques. Gratuitous use of them is quickly being detected as gratuitous use, and that does actually even subliminally turn people off. They're like, they just don't think about it, but they're like, I've seen yet another one of these. I've seen that.
Yeah, totally. So we have a group of economists, obviously, because we're a bank, right? I think one of the most interesting things that you can do in banks is talk to your economists, because they are fascinating people who are researching just sometimes things you would never even think to research. And what's happening in the economy, but what's happening in the labor force, what's happening, what's the impact of Brexit, what's the impact of all these things you see in the news. And so these teams of economists are researching this stuff, and they publish these amazing, very long format pieces of content on them, but they're not really digestible. And so we found a lot of success with infographics when we're helping tell those stories and let people interact with that data, because it makes it really approachable. And otherwise it would be really hard to tell that story. And so we found a lot of success there, but honestly it's just because it's a really complex topic that's interesting anyway.
That's a good point, and that actually links in with a question we've had through from Curtis. So it's a bit of a tough question, but if you had to choose between, I guess, if you had to choose between emotional appeal and informational appeal, what do you think would be more effective as a piece of content?
Wow.
It's a tough question, right?
If done well, I think emotional appeal is probably more powerful, but the key is that emotional appeal is probably the hardest to get right, because
sure.
if 1 degree off and you feel inauthentic and you turn people off. If you can really make somebody cry or you can make somebody laugh, you get them in ways that are undescribable. But man, if you don't do that right, then you're cheesy, and cheesy's worse.
Cheesy's way worse.
Is that kind of a similar point of view to you, Amy? I know you just mentioned then about the economists and how interesting that can be, but I know you've got some emotional driven content as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Right, absolutely. Well, and some of the stories our economists are telling are things like things that actually do have an emotional impact, and so the way that we convey that information, that factual information that could be relatively dry because it's numbers and charts, if we weave stories into it and show how it impacts a person, it can also have an emotional appeal. So, as a bank, building brand trust is really important to us, and so I find that developing emotional content that helps pull the trust feelings to the surface is really imperative. And this is something in financial industry, healthcare, and many other industries as well. People make brand decisions in the limbic part of their brain, right? We make this decision about how we feel about a brand based on, do I trust you? Do you get who I am? And so I think it's really vital that we understand the emotional impact that content can have, but only if it's authentic, only if it comes from a really authentic place and you're not trying to manipulate an outcome. It needs to be actually conveying something that's true about your brand, not something that research tells you people may respond to.
Okay, again, it's not that thin line, I guess, between being selling and being authentic. It's a tough line to think. There's lots of questions coming in. Please keep them coming. I'm going to try and get through as many as we can. One, I don't want to go into too much depth on and have a broader conversation about vendors and tools. But we have had Karen, and she's asked if there's a specific tool you'd like to use to test content with consumers before going into a wider campaign. So again, I don't want to go into a really deep discussion on what's out there, but if there's a particular tool you want to shout out or highlight, then please do.
You're up, John.
Wow.
I'm totally kidding. We really like Adobe Marketing Suite products, and so Adobe Target is a really great way to A/B test. And so we use that. We also use some online services where you can have online testing, where you can interact with the testers. And we also, this is not a tool, but we schedule time with people who are in our target audience for various types of content and just have conversations with them about the content live. We find a personal touch really helps in addition to the more broadly gathered data.
Okay, that's interesting. You think all the tools that are out there, and really the one that works is just speaking to people and finding out what they think. John, did you have anything to add there, or would you like me to move on?
It also depends on distribution methods. because there's, I mean, it depends. If you're distributing content through your own created apps, player environments, you can start also understanding habits of content selection. If you're presenting a library of content, how people are getting to the content, are they searching, what are the first actions they do when they come into your environment. If you're using public, a third-party distribution method, mining that data, noticing, are people turning away from your content? How long are they watching your content? The key is to find out as much as you can about their behavior coming in and during the course of the content is key. If you have the luxury of the A/B, always, but that's tough when you're producing content, producing two different pieces of content, sometimes tough. So that's, but I do recommend anytime you can get a chance to get direct feedback, it's key. The trick is doing that right. Doing user testing and doing it well are sometimes two different things because you can lead the witness, so to speak, and get false positives. But those are, combining all of those things and then trying to look across it with that objective eye. I've seen too many times where a piece of data gets latched onto by a marketing team or an executive and they run with it. And it's sort of like handing sharp scissors to somebody and saying, go run down that hall. You've got to be careful about the data to say, what is it telling us? Because a false positive could send you in a completely different direction.
Okay, and I guess one last question to round off this section of the webinar before we talk a little bit more about measurement and the metrics of impact measurement. This is going to be another tough question, and I guess that there's no right answer, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Obviously, there's a big appetite for content out there. People are expecting to see lots of content from brands. What's the right balance between producing lots of content and producing high-quality content? Obviously, you've only got limited resources. How do you strike that balance? Amy, do you want to go first on that one?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So, in my opinion, the saying quantity has a quality all its own should not ever be applied to brand content. I think you never want to sacrifice quality for quantity, particularly when you're telling the story of your brand. So if it doesn't answer a question or serve a need, it shouldn't be produced. Don't just make stuff to make stuff. And I think, if you're going to do something, do it well. A lot of times it takes being really scrappy and creative to find ways to make things well within budget. So when you have to pick up the volume, when you have to pick up the schedule, I think finding other brand partners, even local brand partners, and supplementing with locally driven content can really be helpful. And you can do that in a quality way. And it doesn't mean that everything has to be a Hollywood production or that you have to have a film crew on site. You can change the formats if you need to and do whatever format you have in your wheelhouse really well, rather than just cranking out more and more content.
Sure. So make sure all your content's of good quality, but don't stretch yourself too thin trying to produce too much, and try and use your resources as effectively as possible, I guess. So John, did you have anything to add to that?
Amen.
It's a good answer.
It is. I get asked, and it doesn't matter. I do a lot of work with the adventure travel industry and the travel partners, and I get asked when I do talks on media production, how long should a piece be? And I often say long enough to be interesting, short enough to keep their attention, which frustrates people because they really isn't an answer, but it is. It goes also for how much. And it also applies to goes back to that testing is, if you're headed down a path and you produce a whole series of content and you've sunk the budget into it and you've gone down the wrong path, you're sunk. An impactful piece of video that can be proliferated around well, that it grabs people, can be more impactful in a whole series. It's that balance, and again, you know, I don't say pour all your budget into one piece and make it the Hail Mary, but you've got to be careful that if you're, like I said, a whole series of things, that you stretch the budget just because you wanted that differentiation doesn't necessarily help your cause either.
Okay, so it sounds like the key takeaway from both of you was don't stretch yourself too thin. Just make sure what you're doing, you're doing well. So I'd like to move on to the second poll now, as we move to the next section of the webinar. So I think that will be coming up on your screens now. And the question is on impact measurement. So when measuring the performance of your content marketing strategy, to what extent do you have a clear picture of your success? Are you really at the top of your game here and you've got complete clarity? Do you have a very good picture? Are you getting there? You have a reasonable extent of the idea of how you're performing, or do you have no clue at all of how well your content's performing? So I'll just keep that poll running for a few more seconds. I can see the results starting to come in. No one said complete clarity yet, which is perhaps unsurprising. So going to close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and that poll's now closed, and the results should be coming up on your screen. So as trailed, no one has got complete clarity on the content marketings. So I guess that's not surprising. If you do have complete clarity, please let me know, and we'll definitely get you in for a webinar. I think what is interesting is the amount of people that are really at the start of their journey. They don't have any idea at all, or they only have I guess the beginnings of an answer. So John, is this surprising to you?
No. Well, I mean, to that many people think they have it to a reasonable extent. I would love to know what reasonable is, but not surprising. Nobody has complete clarity. I think it's an inexact science, especially if you're in if you're doing marketing, say, in the media business, to get people to go watch a show. Rarely do you have the ability to say exactly that it worked. If a rating goes up of a show, you hope it worked and you believe it does. You know, the way you can attribute it is if you're getting direct sales off of something and somebody, you know that somebody said, I watched this video and it made me click and I'm buying something. So those are measurable. The more you can measure it, the more clear you can have of success. Or popular buzz or things like that. I think but you have to go in having some, what are we going to be okay with? What do we hope is going to happen? Those are the kind of words that I hear when you're producing content, big, small, because you know, I mean, unless you're making a movie and measuring box office returns, then I guess you can't have a clear picture of success as making the money back. So I think it really depends on the kind of media you're producing and what its intent is will help, derive that.
Sure. I mean, as John said, it's an exact science, but Amy, do you have any idea why there's still such a lack of clarity when measuring the impact of your content and attributing that? Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so, with content marketing, there's no real linear conversion experience, which I think is why we struggle to define it and measure it. It doesn't fit neatly on executive reports. One of the things that we do is we look at our content as how it contributes to the overall marketing efforts. And so, if I can develop content that is making some of the other channels more efficient, then that's a success metric that can be measured and reported on because you have data from those other channels, and you can tell if someone, generally, if someone engages with your content and with those other channels, and see how that makes them more efficient. So that's one way you can do it. And it's definitely an inexact science. I think you have to look for ways to track absolutely everything you can and be really creative with it. Sometimes we will, with audience segmentation, we'll promote a particular piece of content to a very narrow subset of the audience, see how it performs, and then use that as a model to measure other traffic that comes through. We've put together a lot of different models just to try to measure, and I think everybody's sort of working on that right now, and it's challenging, but makes us all feel good to know we're in the same boat, right?
Yeah, I think that's one thing from these webinars. It's good to see that kind of everyone is kind of facing similar challenges. So we've still got lots of questions coming through, and I will get to a few more of those. One question, I guess, from myself. You mentioned what looks good in an executive report there. I know we spoke about earlier views as kind of the right metric for Snapchat that you go by. What do you put in those executive reports? What are your, I guess, your key metrics for different formats? Amy, I guess I come to you first with that one.
Sure. So we talk about time on page or time engaged with whatever asset, whatever format it happens to be in. If there is a click-through, we talk about click-through rate. If there's a call to action, click-through rate on the call to action. Engagement rate from however we're promoting it. So you can look at all the various channels that you could be using to amplify the content or promote the content and see how many people are seeing that and engaging with it. Social shares, we want to make content that people want to talk about and that start conversations. And again, this does vary by channel because our measurement for a consumer audience is different than our measurement for a commercial audience. So always keep the audience in mind when you're trying to measure it.
And John, is that something you echo?
Yeah, I would have to say me too on that one.
Okay, well, perhaps another way to look at it, and something I'm interested to hear, it's actually a question we've had come through from Sandrine, but it's a question I had written down as well as something to ask, is with comparing these different metrics and comparing these different formats, how do you compare one format against another? I guess what success looks like with one format is going to be very different for another, so how do you know which one to use? Or which one's been most effective, I should say.
I think let's go back to our goals, right? If your goal is to reach a particular audience, you're using that you're going where that appeal is. If you're going for potentially some kind of purchasing moment, using a platform that lends to that, it really speaks to the messaging you're trying to drive, and picking that, like I said, the inauthentic publishing a piece of content in the wrong place, or the people in that audience going, well, why is this here? You never want that question to be asked. So you have to think about that and think about the context into which you're creating it and publishing it.
Okay, and is that similar for you, Amy?
Yeah, exactly the same. One of the ways we choose which format is just to look and see where the opportunities are. We also look and see, based on the specific audience we're trying to reach, where are those folks engaging? Where are they going to consume media, and where are they interested in having a conversation about their finances, or adventure travel is actually something we really like to talk about too. So where do they want to go and talk about adventure travel? Where does our audience overlap with the adventure travel audience? And so, most of it comes back to audience and how we go where the audience goes. We don't try to pull them into a different format or pull them into a different property. We go where they are.
Okay, and how does the success of a campaign, or I guess weaknesses of a campaign, feed into your next campaign? What sort of process do you use? Do you go back and look at a previous campaign and say, hey, this audience responded really well to this, we'll do more of that, or this format wasn't working great? And how do you ensure, I guess, that what you learned from previous campaigns fit into your future strategy, Amy?
Yeah, so we look at it and we see what sort of lift we see in conversion overall with the particular audience that we're looking at across different product sets. We see how people are engaging with the content. how much it was shared, what sort of, do some sentiment analysis and see if anything has shifted with talk about your brand or talk about the topic that you're discussing. One of the things that's really important to us as a brand is to contribute positively to creating opportunities in communities where we serve. And so whenever we can promote nonprofits or individuals in those communities who are really doing a great job and creating opportunities for kids or for people in need, we try to join in that conversation and support it. And so measuring how successful we were in doing that is something that helps inform us going forward. Because, as a brand and as people, obviously we want to really contribute to a positive world and a positive conversation for society, and at the same time as we're supporting our brand. And so, are we doing a good job of creating opportunities in our communities? Are we doing a good job of helping and promoting people who are? Those are the sort of questions we ask ourselves, more looking back at what we've done and planning for the future.
Okay. And John, is that similar for you? Do you, maybe test bits of content first and see which one works best and then put that out? Or is it, learning from previous campaigns? How do you make sure that your insights are fed into your future strategy?
Sure. I think it depends on the type of content producer. If you're looking at independent short-form producers, they are absolutely glued to it isn't a test piece of content. It may be their first piece of content. It may be one in a series. But they are constantly, like I said, paying attention to what the audience is saying, making those adjustments. If you're a larger firm and you have the ability to use the tools that track the virality of a piece of content, you're seeing where it's going, who's talking about it. You're trying to discern that why. Why did it get picked up? Why did it get moved around? Why did people share it? And you're trying to capture that lightning in a bottle.
Okay. I've got another question actually come in from Phil Greenwich. And John, you may be the best place to answer this to start with. He's interested to find out, in such a hyper-connected environment where people's attention spans are decreasing, is long-form content still effective, or should you be working to more, I guess, shorter content and that kind of snackable content?
Well, gosh.
Yes, another tough question.
No, it's fascinating because there's this myth that the only thing that people are watching is short-form content these days, and there's probably more, certainly of the television length style content being produced today than ever before. People are still glued to watching a movie. I think where they watch it and how they consume it is different. I think what's nice is we're seeing the release of content from the rigid distribution rules and length rules. So if you think about that, how long really is a television show? Well, if you take all the commercial time out of it, then it's, could be 22 minutes. If you look at the distribution, the native sort of internet distribution companies who are potentially subscription-based or subscription-based and not necessarily driven by advertising windows or producing content, they can be flexible with the content. They can tell a story, end it when they feel like is the right ending point. If it's episodic, pick it back up again. So what I think is that you have to think about content beats, you have to think about your creative, and what is long enough to grab that audience and keep their attention. I'm sure people can think about movies they've gone to that thought, wow, it just went a little longer than it needed to, or gone and saw a movie that was 3 hours long and were riveted to it the whole 3 hours, and you didn't think to yourself, why is this so long? It worked for you. So short form content, it depends. Are you trying to be fast and punchy? Are you grabbing a particular audience when they're snacking on content, or are you hoping to grab them when they're sitting down and relaxing and wanting to have a longer exposure? So I guess question is, are you entertaining, or are you trying to potentially market to them, and where do you expect them to consume it? I don't necessarily, middle of the day expect somebody to consume a 2-hour movie on their mobile device if I'm hoping to catch them with quick snackable things. So I think it's again, what are you trying to use, and what are you trying to talk them into, if you will?
Okay. And Amy, do you have anything to add to that? Are you using long-form content at BBVA?
Yeah, we actually are using long-form content and planning more because we've gotten such great results from clients and potential clients engaging with our content. And, I think people are willing and ready to engage with as long as it's interesting. And, back to what we were talking about earlier with infographics, as long as the format you've chosen matches the content. It has to be a subject worthy of long-form content. Otherwise, you're just wasting people's time. I think, particularly on mobile devices, if you're going to do long-form content, make sure that you have optimized it for mobile, because a lot of people on their commutes or when they're sitting in a waiting room somewhere or they're in between meetings will consume that long-form content on their mobile device. And so making sure that everything is fully optimized for mobile is essential. I enjoy snackable content, producing it, telling small little stories that can encourage people or spur them on to action. But I will say that my experience with brands is that I want a brand to have more depth than you can convey in snackable content. I think it's a really valuable thing to have and to do well. But if you don't have that depth to tell the longer story about how all of those little bits of information fit into the broader brand story, I think that it requires more brand maturity to get to that point where we can connect everything through that longer form content to really tell a robust, comprehensive story that ties everything else together.
Okay, great. I'm aware we're quickly running out of time, but I guess please feel free to get any more questions in through the webinar software, and if there's time we can come back to them, or if not, maybe we can let you know over email. But one question I wanted to get in, while we've still got some time, is more on the timeliness of content, and I guess what kind of structures and procedures you have in place to help plan the timeliness of your content. Things like event calendars, kind of planning in. I mean, if you know the Super Bowl's coming up, do you kind of prepare content for that? If you've got maybe the premiere of a movie or the launch of a new TV show, what sort of processes do you have in place for that? And John, I guess I'll come to you first.
Timeliness of content. Well, I think, gosh, it really depends on the messaging you're trying to drive to people and when you expect them to be paying attention. Timeliness can be, I think Amy was referring to, it could be time of day. It could be when do you expect people to be paying attention to certain things. Any number of studies will tell you when people switch on their devices, when they tune in, they're paying more attention to things. So when are you hitting them with a piece of content? When do you release a piece of content? How do you notify people the content is available? Is it event-driven or is it evergreen? You got to also be conscious of, I mean, this is I think the marketer's dilemma is you want to hit, if you were thinking of the Christmas season, everybody's rushing after, say, Thanksgiving, but you don't want to get lost in the noise. So I think it's the classic chasing I don't want to get lost in the noise, but I want to make sure I get noticed. So balancing those pieces out. I think that if you have the person that has the answer to that question, they should do a webinar. Because I find that's the trickiest piece is when are people knowing when people are paying attention and being able to get it in front of them.
Okay. Yeah, I know what you mean. I think with a lot of these questions, there's never going to be the right answer, and I think when there is, I'm going to be out of a job and not be able to do any more webinars. But Amy, I'd be interested to hear your approach to timely content. As John mentioned, is it more about getting the right time of day and making sure you're kind of getting the right piece of content at the right time? I know as well BBVA do a lot of planning around, I guess, certain holidays and certain kind of events as well. So just to hear your take on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you mentioned the Super Bowl. We produced a lot of content for people traveling to the Houston area for the Super Bowl because we have such a large presence in Houston, and so we wanted to feature and promote a lot of the innovation and really great things that are happening in that city. It's an amazing, diverse city, and so we wanted to help tell that story. And with other holidays, we'll plan ahead of time, pretty far in advance of the holiday itself, just to talk about, what sort of story that we can tell, how we can be encouraging and forward-looking, and start a conversation. We also look at life stage content as it relates to times of year, because since we're in financial services, I'm sure we're all aware that people buy homes in certain seasons more than in other seasons, and kids start school, young people go off to college, all sorts of life stage events that really impact how you interact with your bank and looking for a new bank. And so a lot of that life stage content is timed based on time of year, just because that's when people are interacting with it and engaging with it. And so fortunately that part of it is fairly predictable, and so we can plan for it year after year.
Okay. Well, we're running low on time now, so I guess I'd like to round off today's webinar, and let's say a big thank you to Amy and John. Your insights have been great, and thanks for contributing. It's been great having you involved. If anyone's joined halfway through or just missed, I've seen a few questions come through about the recordings. We're hoping to have those available early next week, so just keep an eye on your inbox, and they'll be through to you. And if you're looking for other insights and to find out more, Amy and John are going to be speaking at our flagship marketing event in May. They're going to be speaking alongside 50 other brand speakers, and I think we've got coming on screen some of the logos there and some of the other brands you can hear from. So we actually have a discount for people that are involved in the webinar. So that's at the bottom of your screen there now. If you enter in webinar 100 while booking for the Insight Marketing Summit, you receive a $100 discount. And also we should be sending across to you the brochure in the chat function of the webinar. So do take a look at that and see what all these other speakers will be covering and which topics we'll be talking about at the summit. So once again, thanks to Amy and John for joining us, and a big thank you to all for signing in as well. I hope you have a great rest of your day, whether that's the morning now for you or whether you're about to head off out of the office, depending on where you are in the world. But yeah, have a great rest of your day, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you.